Let's begin. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is b6, a6, king to d4. Next puzzle, here are the threats. Queen takes queen. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes queen, pawn takes queen, king to a6, king to c4, king to a5, king to b3, b5. Let's continue. The threats are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using g4, a5, king to d5. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. Checks in puzzle position are: rook takes rook, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook takes rook, check. King takes rook, b4. King to e2, b4. Pawn takes pawn, check. King takes pawn. King to f2, d3. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: rook takes rook, check. Queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes queen. Rook takes rook, check. King to g7. Rook takes queen. One more. Here are the threats. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen to h7, check. Queen to h4, check. The puzzle is solved using queen to h4, check. King to g7. King takes rook, d2. Queen to h5. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Pawn takes queen. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is pawn takes queen, b3. Queen to f1. Another one. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Checks in this position are: knight to f7, check. Knight to g6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is knight to d7. Queen to f3. Knight takes rook. One more. Threats in this position are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. h4. King to g4. a5. Pawn takes pawn. c5. Next puzzle. Threats in this position are: king takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is king takes pawn, b4. a4. b3. Pawn takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: bishop takes knight. Queen takes knight, check. The checks are: bishop to h7, check. Queen takes knight, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to e4. Rook takes knight, check. Bishop takes rook. Next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: rook takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to e3, check. Queen to c1, check. Knight to e2, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes knight. Next puzzle. The threats are: knight takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes rook. Here are the checks. Bishop takes bishop, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes bishop, check. Pawn takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Another puzzle. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Bishop to f4, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is bishop to f4, check. King to b1. Knight to e5. Queen to h7, check. Rook to d7. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are: queen takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes rook. The checks are: queen takes pawn, check. Rook to g2, check. Rook to h1, check. The best move in puzzle position is Rook takes rook. Queen takes rook. Knight to e5. Next, here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. The checks are: Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: Queen takes pawn, check. King to h8. Queen to h5, check. Queen to h7. Queen takes rook. Another one. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to h5, check. The answer is: Rook to h5, check. Another one. The threats are: Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Rook to f6. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let's continue. The threats are: King takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook to a8, check. Rook to f7, check. g7, check. Solution to the puzzle is: King takes pawn. Another puzzle. The threats are: there are no threats in this position. Here are checks in puzzle position. Rook to a1, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to a2. Queen to b1. Rook to a1. Queen to f1. Rook takes queen, check. Next puzzle. The threats are: Bishop takes knight, check. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Queen takes knight. The checks are: Bishop takes knight, check. Solution to the puzzle is: Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Bishop takes knight, check. Pawn takes bishop. Knight to a4. Bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Queen to b4, check. Knight to c3. One more. Threats in puzzle position are: Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using: Queen takes pawn, check. King to h8. Queen to f6, check. Bishop to g7. Knight to f7, check. King to g8. Queen takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is: Bishop takes knight. Pawn takes pawn, check. King to h8. Next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes queen. Checks in puzzle position are: Queen to d8, check. Queen to e8, check. Queen to f8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is: Queen to f8, check. King takes queen. Bishop to h6, check. Bishop to g7. Rook to e8, checkmate. Let's continue. Threats in this position are: Knight takes knight. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes knight. Pawn takes knight. King to e4. King to d7. f5. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.